Show, taking your business from seed to sapling to towering giant, with your hosts, best-selling author and business growth experts Noah Fleming and Shawn Veltman. This is the only show that gives you proven, pragmatic, and immediately applicable business growth strategies every week in 15 minutes or less. Here's Noah and Shawn.
Dun, 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 dun. We are back, everybody. You like my sound effects? I'm throwing those in now. Shawn, we are here for another great episode of the Evergreen Show. How are you today, my friend? What's going on? Are you still in crazy Calgary, Alberta?
I sure am. I'm doing great, Noah. I for one am loving your sound effects. I think we need more of them sprinkled throughout the podcast.
So here's what I want you to do today. I want you to share your topic of choice today. What do you want to talk about today with our listeners? What do you want to rant on today? Are you going to get into things being frou-frou and hippy-dippy and all your famous words again? But what do you want to talk about today?
You know me so well. I am going to rant, and I am going to rant against hippy-dippy and frou-frou. What I want to talk about today is it's a concept that we've brought to, not all, but quite a few of the companies that we've worked with together. And it's this concept of attitude as a corporate asset.
So tell me what you mean by that. Attitude as a corporate asset. What does that even mean?
I love that question. What does that mean? Tell me more. It's my favorite question to hear from you, from clients, from anybody, because it shows that there's interest. It's it's a hook. Attitude as a corporate asset. To me, this is what it's all about. And you guys might have had the same experience. Especially when I was younger, in business school and first couple of years out, nothing would frustrate me more than reading a book or an article or hearing a speaker talk about how important it is to have a positive attitude. And, the most important thing you can bring to any job is a good attitude. And I always took a lot of, I disputed that a lot. And I think there's some good arguments against that because without more context, it's a BS statement. It's hippy dippy.
I gotta interrupt you here because I think it's funny and it's fruitful. But my mentor Alan Weiss, my business coach, he often tells the story of when he worked for W. Clement Stone. Now, for those who don't know, W. Clement Stone was a sort of Napoleon Hill type of guy, major insurance guy. He wrote a couple of books. One of them, his most important being, I forget exactly what it called, maybe just positive mental attitude. And he used to talk about PMA. And Alan tells the story that he would walk around with this cane and this sort of wig on and these crazy fur coats and this gold ball on top of his cane. And one day Alan and him were having an argument, and the guy said, "You've got to have more of a positive mental attitude." And he said, if everybody had $400 million in the bank, they'd have a positive mental attitude as well. And so Clement Stone's was, his thing was, everybody just needs a positive mental attitude, but he was worth $400 million. And I think it's a lot easier when you've got that in the bank. But anyways, short digression.
I think it's a great point, and I don't want to go too far off field, but I think a lot of times we hear this idea of positive attitude, or you just got to work harder or have a positive attitude from people who have already succeeded. You don't hear about all the people with a great attitude who failed miserably. Success bias, survivorship bias is a huge thing. So that always really bugged me when I heard people talk about it. But, it chagrins me to admit that the more we've worked with companies, the more experience we've both got, the more I've come to realize that there is a fairly large kernel of truth to that. Just like most cliched BS, it's not explained well by people who are spouting it. So to me, here's one of the turning points for realizing the importance of attitude as a corporate asset. And Noah, chime in and let me know if you've heard something like this before from your clients. But I remember the fourth time I heard this after talking to 6 CEOs, it clicked even through my thick skull. And what they said was this, and I'm paraphrasing here, of course, because it came from many people, but they said, what really bugs me, Shawn? It bugs me when people walk into my office and think that they're looking smart or impressing me by telling me all the problems in the organization. And, it doesn't take much intelligence or, work to find a problem. Anybody can find a problem. What's more impressive than that is when they walk in with a solution to that problem. Even more impressive than that is if they walk in with a solution that doesn't take many resources. And of course, the most impressive thing is when they walk in and say, a lot of people might think this is a problem, but here's how we can spin it as an opportunity. And I think the only difference in each of those categories is a difference in the way that you look at the world, or attitude, for lack of a better term.
Okay, so now you're ringing some bells for me, because I have heard this before in a number of scenarios. In different scenarios, you were given the example of talking to CEOs. Let me share where I hear this. I do a lot of work with sales teams and sales organizations, and so I talk to a lot of sales guys. And it's a tough job. I will give them that sales is tough. But when we've talked about internal benchmarking before, looking for the outliers, who's doing the best, setting the baseline, all that stuff. When we start to find who's doing best and who's doing the worst or not as well, what I find is the worst corporate attitude comes from the guys typically not doing as well. They're the ones that say things like, hey, well, that won't work. It's never worked around here. I don't see that working anytime in the future. Whereas the top guys look at a new idea and go, you know what? I might be able to utilize that. That's something I can try. That's something I can use in my toolbox. But then you have the guys who tell you behind closed doors, they're the cat's meow. They're the ones that are really, negative about change, negative about new initiatives, negative about showing them, hey, maybe you can try something new. It also reminds me of the classic story of the surgeons, which we've talked about before. The surgeons that didn't want to wash their hands because their ego said, I'm a surgeon. I don't need to be told that I need to follow a checklist to make people not die on the operating table. But as we've talked about before, from one of our favorite books is the Checklist Manifesto, 37% increase a decrease in illnesses and deaths on the operating table when surgeons follow a checklist. So I think, again, attitude, I get it now, so important. But what can we do? How can we help our listeners with this in their organization when they've got these negative Nancys in there?
Before I go into specific, I do want to share one more story or observation, because I think we see it a lot, and it's that a lot of salespeople will tell us when we go in, and guys, if you haven't picked this up by now, we don't often go in and immediately pick a very complex thing to work on and implement rocket surgery in an organization. What we often do is go in and find the simplest thing that has the biggest impact, and it often is the simple things that have the biggest impact. So we'll go in and we'll say, guys, you don't have the sales process in place. We're going to put a sales process in here. And as you said, behind closed doors, what we hear from the worst performing salespeople is always, I think that's going to be really good for all the new guys, but I've been here for 15 years and I don't need to follow a process. I just know what to do.
Until they get hit by a bus or run over by an RV, which we've talked about before, then everybody's pooched. Or
they've been there for 15 years, but they don't have 15 years experience. They have 1 year of experience 15 times. Anyway, what we find is it's often the worst performers who resist trying something new the most. Another digression, but it fits into the theme. I was a stock trader for a number of years, as some of you might know. And one of the things that was most interesting to me was that the absolute smartest people had the hardest time cutting their losses, because they were used to convincing everybody else in a room around them and themselves that they were right. And unfortunately, the market doesn't care if you have good reasons. It's just going to do what it does. And I find the biggest tragedy for me isn't when dumb, low performers have a bad attitude. The biggest tragedy for me is when really intelligent people who have all the capability in the world to be high performers spend their energy looking for problems, looking for excuses, looking for why they can't be held responsible for their numbers, rather than putting that same energy into finding ways that they can be more successful.
So let me bring you back and let me ask you again then, what can our listeners do about this? I've got a few ideas, but I want to hear them from you first.
Sure. So I'd say that the first thing, if it's you who has a negative attitude and you've recognized that in the past and you recognize it now, then just challenge yourself to take the time to ask yourself different questions. Ask yourself a better set of questions. Instead of what's wrong with this or why won't this work, ask yourself, why will this work? How will this work? If this works, what has to happen to make it work? What can I do to make this work more effectively? If you've got members on your team who are just pushing back with negativity after negativity and, really expending their efforts in the wrong places, ask them the same question. Ask them, say to them, Jim, you're a smart guy, take the devil's advocate position here. I know you really believe that this isn't going to work, but let's say you want to convince me this is going to work. Do that now. And slowly train your people to start looking for the reasons why something will be successful. Now, I'm not going to claim this will turn dross into gold. This isn't going to make any bad idea work. But it is a really good exercise to go through to see if you can find the ways to make programs, processes, or existing structures work better.
So I think all really fascinating stuff. It reminds me of going out for dinner with people that just, they're really negative. They can't try sushi, right? They can't try. I don't eat eel. Just try it, damn it, right?
Exactly. If you don't like it, what have you lost?
Right. And it's the same thing when we're talking about new initiatives and organizations. Give it a try, but don't tell us that it's good to our faces and then go behind the companies or whoever's back and dismiss it or say it won't work. More importantly, if you haven't done it, right, just dismissing something without doing it, without trying it, is one of the biggest errors we can make almost anywhere in our lives, in our businesses, in our companies. It doesn't matter. And so I think it's such an important thing. And I wholeheartedly agree with you now that it is a corporate asset to have good, valuable, eager people. It reminds me a lot of Dan Pink's work with Drive, right? And what really drives people to perform and to do well. And I think if you can get people that have that drive by giving them the autonomy to try things, to bring their own ideas forth, that can really help. But let me ask you this, Shawn, how can we bring this back to a challenge for our listeners this week?
So I think it's just wrapping up what I said earlier. So challenge in 3 parts. Part 1, identify an area where you have dismissed something or where you haven't given something the attention that it might otherwise deserve because you just immediately thought that it would fail or it's not applicable to you. And revisit that. See if you can argue yourself out of that position. Challenge 2, find somebody who you manage that you know has a bad attitude and ask them one of the challenging questions to try to get them to take a positive spin on it, to see if they can find something valuable in an area that they've dismissed. And then challenge 3 is to build on those successes and turn them into habits or processes in your organization.
So I would add challenge number 4, which is apply this to your normal life and do something that you've dismissed without actually trying. Give something a try. And then look throughout your organization and find the areas where things like this are being dismissed without actually being tried. Are there people in your organization that are bringing others down through their negativity or whatever it might be? So Shawn, I think this is a fabulous topic. I'm glad you brought it up today. Is there anything else you want to add here today?
I think that really covers it well for today, but I'm sure we'll be revisiting this because it's a very deep area and it's been so poorly covered in the past by other people and writers who have talked about it shallowly that I'm looking forward to picking more specific pieces of it and continuing to dive in the future podcasts.
Well, thank you for ending the show on a high note by throwing all the other authors under a bus.
That's my positive spin on it.
But I think you're right, and we will continue to dig down deep on these very topics in other episodes of the Evergreen Show. If you have ideas or things you'd like us to cover in the Evergreen Show, definitely reach out to us. Let us know what you think. Please leave us reviews. If you want to share this with somebody, maybe there's I called that person a negative Nancy. I don't know where I heard that before. Debbie Downer, negative Nancy, maybe Saturday Night Live terms. but definitely they might be the person to share this podcast with, especially if they're bringing that attitude towards everything, saying this won't work, we've tried that before, that won't work, nothing will work, nothing ever works, life is just a big ball of depressing situations, or you might just try something new and learn something really exciting. So Shawn, we are under 15 minutes again by 3 seconds. We will see you next week.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to join us each and every week for another great episode of The Evergreen Show with your hosts, Noah Fleming and Shawn Veltman. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review, and we'll catch you next time on The Evergreen Show.